Welcome to the James Bond Book Club. Hosted by me, John Bleasdale. And welcome to the James Bond Book Club. My name is Bleasdale, John Bleasdale, and I'm proud to welcome on our first episode Neil Alcock.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same ring, does it? I don't think. It doesn't quite work.
I'm gonna use it for the whole episode.
Okay, I'll use it next time I'm in a casino.
We are talking about Casino Royale, which is the first book by Ian Fleming to introduce the James Bond character, and with it, a whole world of, the cultural impact of this figure is, I don't know, it's kind of hard to overstate.
I mean, I go back to this book quite often. It's probably the book I've read the most. Maybe along with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's a different podcast, though. But yeah, it's exciting to go back to it because you're not just reading the first in a series of books, you're reading the inception, the launch of this character that has become so iconic for the last kind of 70-odd years. The films and the comics and everything else that's come with it, this kind of thing that has soaked into the culture. And there it is. You read page one and you're like, wow, this is where it all started. It's exciting.
This is about the book. We're not going to talk too much about films and everything, although we'll inevitably reference them. But who was your first James Bond then? Who did you first see at the cinema?
My first Bond at the cinema was The Living Daylights. I'd kind of grown up watching the films on telly with my dad, so I was obviously very familiar with Roger and Sean. But yeah, The Living Daylights was the first one at the cinema, and so Dalton has always been my Bond. And I think some people will say Roger was always my Bond because he was the first one that I saw. But then I think, well, have you actually thought this through? Is he really your Bond? Because he's not as good as Tim, is he? Yeah, I was always vote for Tim when that question arises.
I guess I'm living proof of that because I saw For Your Eyes Only at the cinema, so Roger Moore should be my Bond, but he's possibly my least favorite Bond of them all. I find I know people go on about the silliness and the humor and the this and the that, but the humor is just so woeful at times that it kind of it often ruins really good bits of the film.
I mean, we could have a very long discussion about this, but I'm more or less in agreement. I love Roger Moore, and I think that his Bond films are good films, but they're not necessarily great Bond films. Moonraker is like a great kind of campy sci-fi spy caper, but it doesn't belong in the same series as From Russia with Love, let's say. But maybe From Russia with Love doesn't belong in the same series as all the others. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe that's the thing, is Bond is so good at reinventing himself. He's like the Madonna of secret agents.
Yeah, now I'm picturing Roger Moore in a conical bra. Please move on.
my work is done. Let's pause for a moment and consider that. Okay, well, let's move on to the book. This is Ian Fleming's. Yeah, I mean, it's not just his first Bond book. It's kind of his first book. He's a professional writer to some degree because he's been writing journalism for some time. I mean, how you've been reading? You said you've read this book quite frequently. Have you read the others in the series?
Yeah, I've read them all a number of times. I think I started I properly got into Bond when I was about 11 or 12, I think. And that's when I started to discover this extra world of the books. So there was a secondhand bookshop in the town where I grew up, and I would go and get myself a book from there. They had the old pan editions. I think I saw you tweeted the picture of your Casino Royale copy. So I had that copy from there. They cost like 20p, and they just had this incredible smell, which is really evocative. I've unfortunately got rid of most of them like an idiot, but anytime I smell a book that smells like that, it just takes me right back to that time and that specific shop. Anyway, nostalgia for my childhood is not what we're here for.
I tell you what, they don't cost 20p anymore.
No, they don't, do they? Really should have kept them. But yeah, I've read, so I would, every time I go back and read Casino Royale, I think, okay, now I'm going to go and read the rest. And I get maybe halfway through, and then that project just kind of tails off. So I've probably read, Octopussy, or You Only Live Twice, fewer times than Casino Royale, because I just think going back to Casino Royale is just because I've already mentioned it's the inception and it's very exciting. But also, I love short books. I love short chapters. It's really pacey. It's really readable. It just keeps you hooked all the way through. I just think it's a. I mean, there are unpleasant parts of it which we can certainly talk about, but it's a good time.
It doesn't let up for a second, and it places you right in the middle of the action right at the beginning as well.
Mm.
It's so funny actually that it has sort of like a flashback at the right at the beginning as well. So the structure is almost. I kept thinking he's got one eye on this being made into a film because
Do you
it
think?
has. Well, he mentions Bond looking like Hoagie Carmichael,
Mm.
and there's a little bit like he almost like he's saying, casting agents, this would be the right guy, and
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. So you're right. It's what's the phrase? In medias res. I don't speak Latin, but I think that's and most Bond films start like that, don't they? They start in the middle of an adventure, but then they carry on usually in a kind of linear format. Whereas Fleming introduced this gimmick, if you like, this conceit in Casino Royale where he starts in the middle of the action and then flashes back to after a couple of chapters flashes back to the briefing and then goes back. And I think that happens quite a lot, doesn't it, in Fleming's Bond books?
yeah, it definitely happens in Live and Let Die because I've been trying to get ahead of myself
Okay.
and reading the second book,
I
and
feel
that
like it
that
happens a lot. Maybe it just happens two or three times. I don't know.
yeah, I think you're right though, and I think it does have that advantage of putting you in the middle of the action, which is exactly what the films do as well to some degree. Although they
Hmm.
do it as he's finishing off the last mission before he goes on to the next.
Yeah.
So it gives you an action scene to begin with, or some sort of circumstances which are exotic, and then you go back to London, and you go and see the green baize door and
Hmm.
the desk and M and Moneypenny and that more
Yeah.
familiar setting. But the very first chapter starts with this. I'll just quote it because I think it's worth it. The very first sentence.
Read it in your best audio book reader voice.
Yeah. Audacity, thanks you for. Hopes you have enjoyed this audiobook. The scent and smoke and sweat of a casino are nauseating at 3 in the morning. Then the soul erosion produced by high gambling, a compost of greed and fear and nervous tension, becomes unbearable, and the senses awake and revolt from it.
I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it? It's so evocative. It's like a sensory assault. All of your olfactory juices are flowing based on what you've just read. And then later on, he uses words, well, in there that you just, he uses words like sweat and compost and revolt and really unglamorous words that kind of make you really think about where you are. You're in a casino, which sounds exciting, but also it sounds pretty miserable. It sounds disgusting in a lot of ways. It sounds like you need to have a shower after reading the first couple of paragraphs.
Absolutely. And it's 3 a.m. and he's really tired.
Yeah, he's fucked.
Exactly. And he's got this sort of he's kind of disgusted with the whole thing as well. It's he's not looking at gambling as like, oh, I'm really I love gambling. It's great. It's like it's full of greed and fear and nervous tension.
Mm.
And you never think of Bond being like nervous or in that way. If I've been gambling maybe twice in my life with friends where they've sort of said, "Oh, come along and we're going to the casino or something," and just being utterly miserable at it
Yeah.
and just not enjoying it at all.
Yeah, same. I just feel totally out of my depth. Like everybody around me knows exactly what they're doing, and as soon as I make any kind of move, everyone's going to laugh at me. And Bond never gets laughed out of a casino.
He is a consummate sort of know-it-all when it comes to a lot of these things. Although I'll have to say, I was sort of thinking of Charlie Higson's Young Bond series as well as I read this, because there is a sense that Bond is on a tryout, that he's not yet the secret agent that he is going to be in the later books, and that we sort of assume him to be. There's a sense that M is just sort of giving him a bit of rope and seeing how he does.
Yeah, there is a sense of that as you read it, but I think this is not his first case. You definitely get a sense of that as you're reading, that it's certainly an early mission for him. There's a really great book that I would recommend to anyone who is interested in reading the Fleming books, there's a book by a guy called John Griswold, which is called Ian Fleming's James Bond Annotations and Chronologies for Ian Fleming's Bond Stories. It's a very long title. But basically, this guy, John Griswold, has analyzed the absolute shit out of Fleming's novels to the extent where he's worked out a timeline for every book and when everything happens. So he's worked out that the events of Casino Royale happen in, I think it's June 1951. It was written in 52, published in 53. But we know that that Bond has been working for the Secret Service since before the war, and he became a 00 during the war. So, he's been around for a while. But I think you're right that there's a certain sense of him not being the consummate professional that we have come to know and love, even after a few books, not just from the films.
I wonder if that change is partly due to the sense that the Secret Service itself is changing, and the world is changing. I mean, that's also something that I got a feel reading the book, is that there's something very naive about the world here. They haven't quite settled down into what the Cold War is or is going to be. It's still early days, and relationships between, for instance, the relationships between Bond and Matthias and Felix Leiter reflect a sort of post-war coming together and alliances which aren't yet quite set in the solid state that we then will see them for the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that there's the post-war feeling does kind of loom over these books and the Cold War, and not entirely being sure about who is your friend and who is not. And I think we can talk about this later, but one of the main themes about the book is like good versus evil, and what are those things? And there had recently been the Burgess and McLean scandal, where we discovered that we had Russian agents working in a high office in this country, and that kind of bleeds into this quite a lot. There's the sense that the lines between good and bad, or at least the lines between what we are, we in inverted commas, and what they are, have become blurred. And maybe someone who lives in this country and abides by our rules and lives by our ideologies actually thinks very, very differently, and isn't. Maybe that isn't the way that things should be. It's a bit deep for so early in the podcast, but that's where this book is going, I think.
We're happy to go deep. We're happy to go deep. Because one thing, again, that this book feels surprising for anybody who recognizes, who comes at it naively and has only known Bond through the movies, which I would potentially might be people even listening, is that it's quite a humorless book. It's quite, I mean, it's very straight in many ways. It's not, It's not camp. It's not, or am I wrong?
No, yeah, absolutely. It's not camp at all. I mean, Bond is quite boring. He doesn't seem to be having any fun whatsoever. Mathis is very kind of light-hearted and jovial. When Felix Leiter turns up, he's got this kind of boyish charm. And, the guy at the center is like a rock. He's kind of just, I don't know, he doesn't seem to have any emotions beyond his mission, apart from his love for food and drink. And, that only gets exacerbated at the end of the book.
Let's sort of go through the story a little bit. Give a sort of synopsis, a précis, if you like. So we're in Casino Royale. We're in a French town.
Royal Les Eaux.
Les Eaux, so it's a sort of spa town, which is based on Deauville. And the casino here is based on a casino that Fleming knew. He has said that the inception of the idea came from a wartime incident when he was in Portugal, although his version of the story is different to the person who was his commanding officer's version of the story. His version of the story is he sat down with the German high command and tried to beat them at cards in order to get some money off them, and he ended up losing. His commanding officer of the time, who was with him, said that basically there was no one in the casino like that, and Fleming just made up the story essentially as a sort of what's if, wouldn't it be great if, and then recounted the story as if that was true, which
I wonder if we should believe the novelist who came up with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or his commanding officer. I don't know.
Yeah, who has the most authority
Yeah.
in yeah, as far as objective truth is concerned. But the plot the plot is there, which is this idea that James Bond has been given money from the cash-strapped British Treasury to go and gamble against a agent of Smersh, the chief, who has sort of control over various French trade unions, which they're trying to use as a front for the their communist masters, and so very Daily Mail. He's financially strapped, this guy. He's out on a limb, and he's trying to win back the money so that his bosses won't notice that he's been basically pilfering away the money that he should have been using for their ends.
Mm.
Bond is gonna win, bet against him, win at Baccarat, which is the card game that they play, which is a fairly sort of posh version of Pontoon or 21, except here you have to get to 9.
I'm very grateful for Fleming's mansplaining of the rules of Baccarat in the middle of the book because I wouldn't have understood any of it otherwise.
Well, I heard another reason that he wrote the book, or another reason that he gave that he wrote the book, was to explain to his wife the rules of a card game, which is sort of like mansplaining. You've got to give him credit for how much energy he put into mansplaining. He wrote an entire novel.
But
And most of the plot revolves around this card game. About 2/3 of the book revolves around this and the various sort of shady goings on which occur. But I mean, it's really him in and out of the games room and facing off Le Chiffre.
I think that let's try and approach it in order. So I was going to talk about the card game, but I think
Sure.
it'd be good to mention that the big exciting incident that happens before the card game kicks off, which is where there's an assassination attempt on Bond, which Fleming claims was based on something that actually happened. I mean, that is really exciting. It's really thrillingly written, and it happens. It happens right at the end of a chapter, and you're like, "Holy shit!" And then the next chapter goes back just a few minutes because this explosion happens from kind of Vesper's point of view, and then in the beginning of the next chapter it goes back to Bond's point of view as he's walking down the street like a minute earlier before the explosion happens. That's a really fun kind of way of presenting that incident, but it's so descriptively, it's like everything that Fleming's doing in this book and throughout the books is so beautifully descriptively written. And he talks about the aftermath of the explosion and that there's a smell in the air which is like, I think he describes it as like roast mutton. And you think, wow, that's actually people. That's people that have just been literally blown up in front of you. And there's kind of flesh raining down from the sky and hanging from the trees in glittering shards or something like that. I can't quite remember. But just you're like, wow, I'm really kind of in the hands of a master here. I'm excited by this, and I can visualize all of it, and I can almost smell it.
He definitely goes around the compass points in terms of the senses, doesn't he? He definitely does. Each of makes everything very, very immediate. I remember being a bit sniffy about Fleming for a while in terms of thinking he was a bad writer who wrote good books in the sense of sort of like you don't go to Fleming for the style, or you don't go to Fleming you go for the stories and the ideas and the characters and how bright and shiny everything is. But rereading this, I was totally knocked out by how well it's written and how good some of the descriptions are. Le Chiffre is described, his eyes are raisins poached in blood.
Yes.
You just go, what? You stop and lean back a while and stare at the ceiling, take it in, savor it like a fine wine.
Yeah, he talks about there's a Greek man gambling at the table, and his hands reach out, they scuttle out like pink crabs of that, and he describes the kind of gambling table as a battlefield. There's loads of this stuff all just scattered throughout the book, just really great metaphors and similes.
and really tactile as well. He talks about how the base of the table changes as the game progresses, and it's no longer smooth. It's sort of become ruffled and
Hmm.
woolly. Yeah, that scene of the attempted assassination. I mean, he is there. It's funny because when Leiter turns up as a sort of radio salesman.
Mathis is the radio salesman.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're quite right. Mathis turns up. He does bring some humor because he does sort of like try to deafen the people who are listening in the Italians who are listening upstairs, untrustworthy Italians.
Are the
Uh,
Italians the Muncies? I don't know whether they were.
I just assumed they were because they have an Italian name. Yeah, but
Don't know.
we've already had a little bit of spycraft from Bond, which his hair that he's put over the wardrobe to check things, a little bit of talcum powder just to check that if anybody's been into his room and searched it.
Yeah, really lovely detail that is obviously then carried on into Doctor No, the movie.
But then when he's sort of walking down the street, there's that sense of like, oh, who are these two guys? And he's sort of like, he seems to be kind of quite shocked at the level of violence that has been.
I mean, I don't know how it must only be a few chapters in that happens, and you're not quite ready for it. I don't think, just like he
Mm,
wasn't. But I think there's also a really funny thing about that incident where this is the guy who goes on in society in the real world to become like this fantastic great secret agent, this super secret agent is infallible and indestructible, and he's essentially saved on his first assassination attempt that we know about by a tree, right?
yeah.
He just happened to be walking past a tree when that explosion happened. And if he just left the bar a few seconds earlier or later, he would have died, and there would be no James Bond. Okay, that would be the shortest career for a secret agent.
Age
It's just
26.
yeah, and you think, well, that's really lucky. And uh, there's a there's an interesting thing there where Bond is so lucky, especially in this book. Like
Mm,
he's saved by a tree, and he wins the Baccarat game um, largely by luck, the luck of the cards and the luck that Felix happened to turn up with a shitload of cash for him. Then he's saved later on while he's being tortured by a kind of Deus ex machina that we weren't expecting. Um, and you just think, well, this guy is maybe he's not such a great secret agent because he's rumbled as soon as he gets to the hotel. He's rumbled by the Munces upstairs, and I think it's credit to Fleming that he's created this character who has quite a lot of flaws, like psychological flaws, but also professional flaws. And yet you're just carried along with it and you think, oh, this is exciting. And this guy is kind of great. And then when you stop and think about it, you're like, oh, okay, maybe there's a bit more to it.
yeah, yeah. And the other character that we haven't mentioned yet who comes along to his aid is Vesper Lind, who
Mm.
is he's immediately infuriated by a bloody woman, what is a woman coming along and yet also immediately is obviously affected by in a way that he's not quite ready to admit.
I think she's the weak point in this book. She's a bit underwritten. She doesn't get to do much except slink about in a nice dress and then later on do a lot of crying. I don't think it's one of Fleming's strongest female characters. I think when they made the movie of Casino Royale, I think Eva Green brought a really great interpretation to that character. Obviously, the writing helped, but suddenly she was a three-dimensional character, which I don't think she is in the book. I think she's a bit kind of tossed off.
Well, she kind of doesn't have anything to do as well as she sort
Mm.
of she isn't really sent there. I mean, like in the film, she's the money.
Every penny of it.
Exactly. See, in that exchange we just had, I was Ava Green and you were Daniel Craig. just,
Thank you. Thank you for
just
doing
let
that.
everybody picture that for a moment. Her role is just she's along because the station head has said, she should be there as just in case he needs any help. But there's nothing specific for her to do, and so from the very beginning, she's a little bit like, oh, I'm going to be the potential damsel or the potential hostage. But you said he describes her dress. the level of detail that he goes into when he describes her appearance and
Yeah.
her dress is kind of interesting in and of itself, perhaps.
I mean, it's fairly classic male fantasy fiction wherein all the women are described in incredibly minute detail, especially their breasts and their legs, always getting half a page each. Nobody talks about the bulge in Bond's trousers or I don't know the size of his pecs or anything like that. So I kind of roll my eyes a little bit when
I'm just thinking of, I'd love to write that in the second paragraph. And Bond stood up and walked across the room. What an ass.
the tightest buns the casino had ever seen.
Yeah, exactly. Two buttocks shuffling like a deck of cards. No, point taken, but I actually meant literally the dress. I mean, he goes into such detail.
I moved on to the breasts and legs. It tells you a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's well, you kind of played yourself.
Yeah, sorry, everyone.
He has this, and I think this goes to something else about Fleming, the journalist, is he can't just say she's wearing a black dress. He has to say, oh, she's wearing this style of dress designed by this person, got from this shop. It's put together with a black belt and a golden buckle, and and he gives you everything except the price. And it's almost like he is writing it for advertising copy. And it's people sometimes complain about product placement in the Bond films, certainly the later ones, but it's right there in the novels. I mean, he's always telling you what kind of dress Vesper Linda's wearing, what type of cigarette lighter Bond uses, what type of cigarettes Bond smokes, what's the car. Everything is very, very specific.
But those descriptions of what people are wearing are always limited to the women. Like, what is maybe because traditionally in a scenario like this, the men will just always wear a suit, a tuxedo, and then the women will wear something lovely, like any given formal occasion, a wedding, for example. So maybe that's the reason for that. But I don't know what Felix Leiter was wearing in the casino. I don't know what Mathis was wearing when he rocked up, unless he was dressed as a radio salesman. I assume Bond is wearing a tuxedo, but I can't remember if that's mentioned. It probably is. So there's a little bit of sexism there, but I also think there's a narrative reason for it, and that is to just make that woman stand out as amazing and beautiful and unlike anything anyone has ever seen. And that's, part of the whole fantasy element of the books.
There is going to be a lot of sexism coming along as well.
Yeah.
So you don't have to sort of, really deconstruct Ian Fleming's work to find some of this stuff. It's not in the subtext. It's right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking of that in terms of the racism as I was reading it, because it's like in his briefing, he gets sort of a briefing of Le Chiffre, and there's all this thing about his earlobes, and that shows he's got some Jewish blood because of his earlobes. And you're thinking, okay, is that just the racism of Ian Fleming? Is that the racism of the character, or is that the racism of 1953? Because
it's all of them, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's Fleming thought that's an acceptable thing for me to put in a novel, which would be a credible thing for that character to write in an official briefing.
It's unpleasant to think about, but these books are products of their time. I mean, I can't say much more than that. It's largely indefensible.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just interested because it makes it part of its historical moment as well. Just in the same way that it's got the cars and the this and the that and the other. Obviously, a lot more damaging to other people, but there's an element of like, okay, this is the world that we inhabit here, and this is the sort of thinking that goes on, and these are the people. And that's kind of interesting. I don't know where to go with that necessarily, but it still makes it interesting, Whereas if, I don't know, William Boyd writes a novel about this period, he's probably tempted to leave all that stuff out because he doesn't want to, go there, literally.
And successive reprints of Casino Royale have removed some stuff that is particularly unpleasant. And there's a really great graphic novel adaptation of Casino Royale, which came out a few years ago, which is like almost word for word the novel, but notably kind of redacts that stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, it is interesting. It is interesting in terms of how you process that. But I think we're all anybody who's reading a, a book about a fantasy super spy written in the 1950s knows that this is going to be a slightly outdated in some ways.
What makes Bond interesting in this way as well is that he's this globe-trotting figure, and even though this book is based in one location, it's not a globe-trotting book at all. He sort of talks about Jamaica, and he's obviously well-traveled, and so there is a sense of there's this strange contradiction of sort of cosmopolitan but bigoted,
Mm.
travels all over the world, but has very specific views, which is
Yeah.
exactly like Fleming himself.
Yeah, goes to a lot of lovely places, but hates every single person that he meets there, apart from the Americans and the Texans specifically.
Yes, and the French. Well, some of the French.
Some of them.
Yeah, yeah, some of them are good. Um, well, wait until we get on to Live and Let Die. Uh,
Oh, God.
that's going to be 5 pages long if you redact it. Okay, so moving on to where do you want to go next?
Well, I I said let's do this in order, but I keep going back in a Fleming way. I've started in the middle and now I'm working backwards
Right.
because there is this stuff that really struck me, and it's on page 2, and it's where Bond has he's done some gambling and he's going back to his room for the night, and he's thinking about how the casino staff are going to kind of assess him.
Mm.
And the words that Fleming writes are, he is persevering and plays in maximums. He has luck. His nerves seem good. So we've already talked about his luck, both on the gambling table and elsewhere in life. His nerves seem good. Okay, so that's gambling. And also, as we will come to know, in his career and his life, his nerves are made of steel, right? And he is persevering and plays in maximums. I mean, he is a gambler basically in everything. And this is a reason why there is so many gambling scenes and casino scenes in the books and the films, is because that is basically a metaphor for how Bond lives his life. And I think it's really interesting that we get that on page 2, because it's not something people, I don't know, it's not something I see very often, is these descriptions of Bond as a gambler outside of the casino. But I think it's just there. It's right there for you on page 2. This is what you're going to get for the next however long this character lasts. But he is also cautious. He's got his little trick with the hair and the towel.
I'd say that look is kind of like his defining superpower, for someone who like can kill people and has weapons and does this and does that. He's like a jack of all trades. He's not like, oh, he's the best shot or he's the quickest draw. He's not like Clint Eastwood in the westerns where he's the quickest draw, or there's something specific about, he can shoot a gun, but if you take the gun off him, he'll do something else. He's not great. He's not a great sort of like unarmed, he doesn't know kung fu particularly well or anything like that, as is obvious from The Man with the Golden Gun, the movie. But he drives fast cars. He's physically fit. Although 70 cigarette, he smokes his 70th cigarette of the day
amazing.
in the first chapter.
I can't get over that.
I mean, if you work out how long he's actually awake, it's like a cigarette every 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. But Fleming was drinking like a bottle of gin a day until the early 50s, and his doctor told him to stop. So it's probably just a kind of, I reckon I could easily be this secret agent, just going to change this vice slightly.
Yeah, and he was physically, he won athletic races when he was a kid, and he was a really, he's into his sport.
Yeah, strong swimmer.
Definitely, and he loved his his fast driving, his cars, and the car in this. I mean, I tweeted about it the other day. It's like a 1933 supercharged Bentley, and I was just curious and looked it up on the internet. What does one of these look like? And it basically looks like sort of a metal shoe that you're driving around the Monopoly board.
Yeah,
It's the car from the Monopoly board, essentially.
Yeah, it's crackers, because if you don't know your cars, like I don't, when I read those words about a supercharged Bentley, that sounds really exciting to me. But yeah, in the graphic novel that I was discussing, you get shots of him the car chase with that car, and you just think, wow, is this really? It doesn't look very aerodynamic to me, but okay, what do I know?
And he's he's very good but even there it's all driving that kind of car. It's luck again because there's no there's a modicum of skill, but you're really just hoping that you don't hit. He's hitting 100 miles an hour on French provincial roads. If you're unlucky, you might hit some spiky thing that's been left by the person you're pursuing, but a rabbit could just as well finish you.
So it's so much luck.
So I'm agreeing with you. It's definitely luck.
And he doesn't even like he doesn't get the girl, he doesn't kill the bad guy. He only completes his mission thanks to Felix and his extra cash. There's just and it goes back to what I was saying. It's the way that Fleming writes, you just ignore all that and you just think that this is very exciting. And then it's only when you come back to it and get on a podcast and discuss it with somebody else that you realize, wow, this guy is actually extremely lucky that he even got out of his bed this morning without tripping over and breaking his neck.
After having a very, very hot shower and then a very, very cold shower.
Yeah, and smoking 10 cigarettes whilst showering.
Did you? What do you think of Le Chiffre as a villain?
Yeah, he doesn't say much for. In fact, does he even say anything throughout the whole card game? Just what he needs to. But his description is very evocative, like you said, the blackcurrants poached in blood or whatever it was. It's a bit unfortunate that all Fleming's villains have to have some kind of grossness or physical disability, or they're fat, or I don't know. There's a lot of body shaming going on in Fleming. If you're not the perfect ideal of a human being, then you're clearly a commie and deserve to be killed. But he is a pretty scary character throughout I think because he doesn't say anything throughout the early scenes. There's a sense of foreboding about him for sure. And then when you get into the torture scene, which is obviously incredibly unpleasant and eye-watering in many ways, he just becomes like super evil, and you're like, oh God, what was I going to say? Sorry, hang on. He keeps referring to Bond as my dear boy, or dear boy this and dear boy that, and that becomes a thing in Fleming as well. Not only are the villains horrible to look at, but they're also like really patronizing father figures most of the time. They talk down to Bond as if he's a stupid schoolboy. And I think that is probably something that comes from Fleming's past. And certainly most men or boys reading it could probably relate that to something that from their past. So, I think he gets under the skin. He's a pretty tasty villain, even though he's not in it for very long and Bond doesn't even finish him off.
There's a sense that he's a counterpoint to M, isn't there? M is the sort of adored father figure, and he is the sort of demonic father figure. And Fleming lost his father when he was 9, and so obviously when he was working during the war for the naval intelligence, his commanding officer, who he based M on, he had an adoring relationship with him. He absolutely looked up to him and used him. And it's kind of almost, well, it is kind of touching how it's the one emotion that Bond has, which is utterly pure, is how much he seems to love M. It's like, and the way the narrative tells you that, it doesn't say, it doesn't sort of, you don't have to read between the lines in a sort of, there's no British reticence about it. It's like the man he adored, it says at one point.
But I think that also leads into the stuff about the theme of the book, which is a good and evil, and basically being told what is good and what is bad based on essentially what country you were born in or live in or choose to represent. And so Bond has this kind of unquestioning respect for authority as far as M goes. And that has kind of led him into this life of Red Indians, as he describes it, where, what we're told is good and bad by our leaders is based on almost arbitrary values that we are all supposed to represent. But, who is to say what's good and what's bad? And for Bond, it's M. He'll do whatever M tells him to do. And towards the end of the book, he starts to find it all a bit silly and decides that he's going to kind of jack it in. And it's only when he is personally and mentally tortured that he kind of decides, right, and now I have something solid and concrete to chase after and to destroy, and that's Smersh in this instance, but only really because they mangled his knackers and, upset him as far as his potential wife was concerned. It doesn't really, that dynamic between what he's doing for the country, which is kind of thoughtless, and then what he decides he's going to do for himself, which he's thought about and is now dead set on. But it also involves varying so much emotionally and just becoming this single-minded killing machine afterwards. I think that's all really interesting. Did you get any of that, or am I talking nonsense?
No, I definitely get it. Although I think it's weird that I think his politics and his sort of his crisis of conscience politics moment come kind of after he's been tortured and he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was kind of surprised because I thought that was kind of an invention in the movie. I didn't realize it was actually in the book that I'm retiring. I'm not up to this, and I'm going to go off and live with Vesper Lind, and we're going to be happy together. And it's only with her suicide that you have a moment where he realizes, oh no, they've played me all the way along, and I'm gonna. It's kind of almost like he decides I'm going to be a good secret agent now. I'm going to stop being so shit because, like, in the car chase, he's won the money and everything's gone well. And after everything, when he's driving with Vesper Lind and she says, "Oh, there's somebody following us," he's like, "Oh, who could possibly want to follow us?" And it's like, you're a secret agent. Just have a little bit of curiosity. Not even.
I mean, this is all the way through the book. He's part of what proves what a terrible secret agent he is. Like you mentioned earlier, that Vesper doesn't have much to do throughout the book. So why is she there, right? Bond is never suspicious that she's there doing absolutely nothing. Like maybe she could be spying. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah.
And, he totally fails to pick up on, in the last section of the book where they're having this romance that doesn't go very well, he just doesn't pick up on any of her signals. She's just not into him. And he can't believe that could possibly be a thing, that a woman wouldn't want to be into him. And he's just single-mindedly focused on making sure that his junk works after he's had it completely battered by Le Chiffre's carpet beater. It's always interesting, and Fleming keeps repeating this. Like, Bond is just always thinking about whether he's going to be able to get his end away, and that seems to override any common sense about why Vesper is behaving the way she is. And if he had just thought above the waist for a moment, he might have avoided some tragedy there. But then we wouldn't have the character we know and love.
How could they have known all about this? That's a puzzler, It's like she's just over there. She's sitting. The person you've just met that you have no reason to trust is over there. I mean, it makes the point very early on as well that the reason he gets his 00 is because he's killed just two people, and it's not like oh, you have a license to kill. It's more like you've killed two people and we give you this honorific almost of the 00.
Yeah, I don't feel like that's enough. I think you need to kill a shitload more people before they will, mind you. No, I mean, we'll go down a whole moral rabbit hole here
of how many people you should kill.
Yeah, and also, is it okay to be allowed to kill people, to have a license to kill? Yeah, that's
in real life, you mean?
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to think of the logistics behind how you assign somebody with a license to kill and what the criteria should be. And I don't know whether killing two people in cold blood is like enough. Should you have to do it a bit more than that? Because it's only 2 times, could have been luck. As we know, Bond is extremely lucky. But also, maybe nobody should have a license to kill. That's the pacifist in me coming out. But there would be a very boring series
really
of books
boring
and films
Bond books
if that was the case.
But don't you feel? I mean, this is the thing that I feel is reading these and watching the films and all the rest of it. There is an element of me that wants to sort of twist them and turn them and fit them into my own ideological thing. So I want to sort of go, oh wow, this section where he talks about communism being, the communism of today. How do we know it won't be accepted as the conservatism of than
Mm.
in 50 years' time. And I'm going, this is amazing. I've never really,
Mm.
I don't remember this bit of Bond being so politically sophisticated in terms of just putting these questions,
Yeah,
even no matter what he does. And then there's the other bit of me that thinks you don't have to agree with it. You can just you can enjoy it
of
without
course.
and subscribing to his worldview or trying for him to get him to agree with you.
I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about the good versus evil and what we're told is good and what we're told is evil. And he's opposing one ideology, communism, with the one that he's been told to enforce, which is essentially capitalism and maybe a hint of fascism from the way he behaves sometimes. But yeah, he does go on to question this. But then, like I say, he's Vesper kind of gives him the cold shoulder and then kills himself, and then he's as Judi Dench says, blinded by inconsolable rage, and that's the end of it. But I think what a thing that that all makes for a very, very interesting and layered character. And I think what the films got wrong was that they made him into a hero, like full stop. He's just a hero. There's
Mm,
nothing really questionable about him. And I think Timothy Dalton tried to kind of play him as a bit more than that. And Daniel Craig's films, he certainly does things that come across as less heroic than everything Roger Moore ever did, which was just 100% heroic. So it's a problem. Let's not go on too much about the films, but one of the problems that I have with the films is that in order for them to succeed, for the films to succeed at the box office, he just has to be a great hero. He can't really be that complex. He can't do bad things. You can't even see him smoke anymore. So,
mm.
that's why I tend to go back to the books every now and again.
Yeah, I agree, and I think as a character, I mean, I was talking to Paul Duncan about Doctor No, the film, and he was talking about the difference between a book and a film, and he was just saying the James Bond of the book is not the James Bond of the film, and you just
Mm.
have to see it almost as an
Yeah.
entirely different character. And he's not trying to be likable, and he's not supposed to be likable, I don't think. I mean, I think
Absolutely.
you're supposed to, he's the protagonist of a novel, so you're going through it with him. But there are lots of bits where he's described as, cruel looking, and I hold eyes, and it's not like, it, even when he's talking about romantic, his most romantic thoughts are about Vesper Lind include the line about the tang of rape.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's it's just even at the time, I think that would have raised eyebrows. I don't think even at the time that would have been
Yeah, I agree.
perfectly
But
acceptable. I mean,
I,
you've got to add the point that Ian Fleming was about to get married just before he wrote this novel, and his partner Anne, to be Anne Fleming, they had a relationship which was pretty riotous and involved a lot of S&M. So
mm,
there was it was he bondage and whatnot, literally bondage
there you go.
in this case. I also remember a really good story Noel Coward tells of how he has all this stuff in the book about the food. He had a guy who was an expert on food, and he would just basically write, okay, Bond's in New York, what should he eat? And he
Okay.
would get pages back, and they would say, Bond stops at this restaurant and eats this, which was delicious. Because Fleming himself was rubbish at food, and Coward said that the worst thing that could have happened to you is to be invited to Anne and Ian's dinners, because they were literally like burning the boiled eggs, and you
Well, if
know
the Bond books are anything to go by, I would just expect toast and nothing else. So much toast in the Bond books.
and eggs and
Unbelievable.
yeah,
Yeah.
like at 3 o'clock in the morning after the card thing, he orders like avocados and eggs and bacon and pints of champagne.
Yeah. An avocado pear. Like it's just an avocado, man. Just call it what it is. Yeah. All these things that we take for granted now, but obviously, it's 70 years ago.
1953.
There was still food rationing in 1953. So, people weren't eating avocado pears and caviar on toast. They were lucky if they got toast.
People
So this,
did it probably wouldn't even know what an avocado pear looked
no,
like.
no.
They would have to Google it. That's how bad it was. And you probably needed rationing for Google even then.
Yeah, you could probably only do like one search a day.
Yeah. Have you got your coupon book?
You Google
I
coupon.
used it for Twitter, which we're still calling Twitter because it's the olden days and it's in black and white.
You would be embarrassed to eat with Bond, though, wouldn't you? I mean, if you sat down in a restaurant with him and he ordered the food, you'd be like, oh my God, listen to this twat. What is he talking about? So pretentious. And you'd be like, can I just have a burger?
But there's just so much of it as well. And there's a bit where they're sort of eating and everyone went quiet while they ate. And it's just like they're just scarfing this stuff. You get a feeling Ian Fleming leans back and smokes one of those ridiculous cigarettes he has in his
Oh, yeah,
cigarette
his cigarette.
holder.
Yeah, of course.
So at the end of the book, we kind of get to the point where we have James Bond sort of ready for a series, and ready to be the Bond we maybe recognize more than we do the James Bond at the very beginning.
Yes, but I wonder how much of that we retroactively apply. I probably haven't read enough about Fleming to know whether he was thinking about whether he had his eye on a series, because obviously you had series of books before Bond, Bulldog Drummond, and so on and so forth, and those things that he took from. But was he thinking? Was he sitting there thinking, "This is really great. I can think of loads more adventures for this guy," or was he just knocking this one thing out and basically then didn't know what he was going to do next? I don't know.
Yeah, it feels to me like there's a sense that he is what we talk about today, universe building.
Mm.
There's a sense that he's building this up, and you're quite right though. It could easily be looking back on it, and he could easily have been thinking, well, that was fun. The next one's going to be about a flying car. Listen, Neil, I wanted to do this regular section just because I thought of it and it's amazing. Of the end of every podcast, we're going to have 007 facts that
Okay.
or surprises that we had while reading them. I think I've got four. We haven't checked these, so we could easily be doubling up. But let's
Okay.
see what we go. Do
I
you want to
also
go?
had four, but you have mentioned one of them already, so I'm scratching out the 70 cigarettes a day, which I still can't get over.
Yes, my God, that's yeah. Okay, do you want to go first?
Okay, there's a guy mentioned, one name that is mentioned very early on, the head of Bond's department, which we assume to be the 00 section, is referred to as a man called Clements. Well,
Mhm.
is he even a man? I don't know. I'm assuming he is because I've been
Sexist, because you're sexist.
I've
Because you've been
been
reading James
brainwashed.
Bond and you've become
I've been
sexist.
brainwashed by the patriarchy. But Clements is the head of Bond's department. Now, as far as I'm aware, Clements never ever gets mentioned again. And you would think with Moneypenny and M and Bill Tanner and those characters, maybe that's enough characters, and they don't. Fleming decided he didn't need the complication of another one. But I think that's really interesting that there's a guy there who's just mentioned in one line, one name, Clements, the head of Bond's department, and then we never hear from him again. Like I feel like there should be a head of the double O's to kind of buffer between M and Bond, but maybe there isn't. Maybe there's no need for that. I don't know.
Because the quartermaster hasn't really turned up yet. We haven't really got
No,
Q as
no.
a sort
Lashif
of
is the one with all
character.
the gadgets in this book. He's got the kind of the villain's got the stick with the gun in it, and what's Lashif got? He's got something silly. I can't remember. But anyway, Bond doesn't have any gadgets in this. No, Q hasn't popped up yet.
Yeah, no, I would say as well. I would say that Le Chiffre is almost more Bondy than Bond.
Mm.
He has even the car with the gadget in that he throws out the
Oh,
spikes
that's
at
right.
the
Yeah,
end,
yeah, yeah,
which is
of
like a
course.
Goldfinger thing, which Bond uses. But
Yeah.
I was almost thinking, I wonder if Bond's taking notes because yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go with one then. That's your one. We've mentioned it before, but I'm going to keep it because otherwise I'll run out of things to say. Scrambled eggs. Apparently, this is something to look out on because there are scrambled eggs in every novel, and they turn up in this novel very late at night, and it does make me worry how he got to sleep because his his digestion must be, I don't know. I mean,
I
I'm
mean, it keeps him strong, right? Have you not read Mr. Strong by Roger Hargreaves? She
all
just eats tons
right.
of eggs, and
Loads of
that's how he stays
eggs.
strong. Yeah.
Yeah. Or Cool Hand Luke.
Of course. There you
but those are boiled, so it's different.
go. Okay.
Scrambled eggs, yeah. It just
Yeah.
seems such a funny thing to have in a casino as well. It's some
Yes. In Royale Les Eaux.
bring me in the
Ugh.
scrambled eggs.
Good. I'm glad you beat me to the terrible French accent. I was about to commit a hate crime. Yeah. And you never see Bond eat scrambled eggs in the films, I don't think.
No.
He never eats anything. The most prosaic thing he eats is quiche Lorraine.
Oh, right.
Um,
Okay.
I think that which Roger Moore prepares in A View to a Kill.
Okay. That's a good knowledge. Do you know why French men never have two eggs for breakfast? Because one egg is
Is an
enough.
yes, very good.
Okay, go with your other fact.
I was uh, thinking about the Vesper Martini
Right.
because I drink quite a few cocktails. I've had a fair few Vespers in my time, and it occurs to me that the Vesper is around about 4.2 units of alcohol, right, which is roughly the same as a couple of glasses of wine or a couple of pints of beer in what is essentially just over 100 milliliters of liquid. So if you imagine like a bottle of water that is only big enough for you to be allowed to carry it on a plane, and you've squeezed the same amount of alcohol as that is in two pints of beer into that, that is what Bond is drinking on a fairly regular basis, along with his 70 cigarettes. I mean, it's total fantasy, isn't it? A couple of those, and you wouldn't be able to see what the cards were in front of you. Just madness.
Someone kept, I think it was in the London Review of Books, someone kept track of what he drinks in From Russia with Love. And he says, it's a wonder he didn't do a Yeltsin when he got off the off the plane. And it was the use of Yeltsin as a
Doing a
verb.
Yeltsin.
Yeah.
Nice.
Not many people will remember what that means, but
I get it. I'm old enough to understand that reference.
excellent. Right, my next fact, so fact number three, this will be, is the Second World War. The Second World War is present in this book in a way that it's just not present in the films. The films have taken place 10 years after this book
Mm.
is, and so not only is the Second World War present because that's where Bond has served his apprenticeship. Also, there's a vast number of characters in this book. You know, I mean, I would say maybe a third of the characters have some physical injury due to the Second World War. You know, he keeps meeting people who are missing arms and legs and
Yeah.
patches over their eyes.
There's two characters in this book that are missing an arm, which having thought about kind of psychoanalysis in movies quite a lot, screams castration to me in a way, and Bond's kind of fear of losing the power of his genitals. I was trying to think of a funny word for genitals, but I'm tired of doing that.
It's Willy Wonka.
He's Willy Wonka. He's tired. He's scared that his Willy Wonka might not be able to produce the necessary. Thank you.
Isn't it a bit redundant having like a symbol for that when you actually have his Willy Wonka getting a battering? Isn't it like this is symbolic of his fear of castration? So what about the scene where he gets castrated? What's that
Yeah,
symbolic of?
I haven't thought the theory through that carefully. In all honesty, just struck me as odd, and
Yeah.
I don't know why I immediately leapt to castration as the reason for that. But there you go.
But I just thought that there's a physical, there's a memory, there's a trauma
Mm,
of the war. There are the
yeah,
political consequences of the war. When Felix Leiter gives him the money, he refers to it as the Marshall Plan.
yeah, martial aid, yeah,
And so the idea that the pieces that are fitting back together after the war are still somewhat in the air and are still raining down a little bit.
yeah.
And
Just because the war ended doesn't mean all of that went away. There's hence the Cold War, and you're right. That hangs over the books very much like a
and there is
gloomy
an
cloud.
argument that Bond himself represents a sort of post-war consolation prize or fantasy for the fact that
Mm,
the British lost the war. I mean, we won the war, but we lose the peace
mm.
is the argument. And Bond sustains that imperial pride of like, no, we're still important. We're still saving the world ish.
Yeah, and it's kind of pathetic and tragic in a lot of ways, but you can understand why people might have needed that at that time.
Okay, so your turn, number four.
Yeah, there's a character at the Baccarat table called Monsieur Dupont, who is only very briefly mentioned, but I thought it was very interesting to note that that character comes back in Goldfinger, and he is the guy that Goldfinger is cheating at cards against in the beginning. So you'll remember this very clearly from the film, but it's lifted straight from the book. Goldfinger is playing cards regularly with this guy and taking him to the cleaners because he's cheating. And that is Monsieur Dupont, who is referred to in Goldfinger as the character who was at the baccarat table with Bond in Casino Royale, which is
Ah,
quite rare bit of cinematic universe, if you like, for Fleming. There's
yeah.
a limited number of characters that are carried through to the books, but you don't tend to get that very often, if at all.
The continuity, yeah, no,
Mm,
brilliant. Yeah, because Goldfinger is like one, two, three, four, and it's quite a few novels
yeah,
along, isn't it? It's like
I
three or
can't
four
remember
novels.
how many. Yeah, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven is the seventh.
Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, good callback, Fleming. Nice one.
Mm,
Okay, number five then is yeah, the green baize door in Fleming in M's office. I don't know why, but this always strikes me as something. I'm not. I just don't know why. There's just a sense of like comfort to M and his cozy surroundings.
mm,
And I thought it was something interesting when Ray Fiennes took over the role that they kind of reinstituted that very male, dark wooden furniture, whiskey decanter sort of atmosphere, which they'd sort of got rid of with their attempt with Judi Dench to sort of update that role into something more modern and slightly Blairite
mm.
and obviously female.
I don't know whether that was just a reaction to fans who kind of, Casino Royale, the movie was so different, and Quantum of Solace kind of carried on from that. And I think a lot of fans were like, okay, I kind of like where this is going, but I don't like this, and I don't like that, and I miss M and I miss Q. And so Q had to be reintroduced, and Moneypenny had to be reintroduced, and then M had to become a man again and go back into his plush oak paneled office. I don't know. It's the whole thing about familiarity, isn't it? As far as the
Mm.
films go, and what is going to sell and what isn't, and what is going to make a lot of man babies on Twitter happy and what isn't. But as far as the books go, I think that goes back to like all those descriptions of M's office and the door, especially, and the soft blue light or whatever color it is. I can't remember that comes on whenever M's not to be disturbed. There is something very comforting about it, and you feel like you're in this hermetically sealed room where nothing bad can happen and everyone can relax and just get a bit of exposition in without being shot at or blown up. And then you can move on from there. And it does also represent what you were saying about Bond's love for M. That's where he feels at home. That's where he feels comfortable. That's where he feels safe.
Yeah, it's
So
in
maybe it's a bit
Daddy's
of that.
office. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's got like the green reading lamp as well, like you'd have in the British Library over
Mm.
his, over the desk. It almost feels like M's the author of the books as well as a sort of, it's, come to Daddy anyway. Um, okay, your turn.
So I think it's interesting that Bond is presented generally as a bit of a lone wolf, and I
Mm,
think there is a line in Casino Royale where it says he prefers to work alone, but almost invariably he's teamed up with at least a woman, and usually Felix Leiter is along for the ride. And there are four of them in this book. There's Bond, Mathis, Leiter, and Vesper on this adventure more or less together. And I just kind of just it's a bit like a kind of Howard Hawksian gang of pals twatting about on the on the north coast of France, having a great time. It's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't ring with the kind of image of Bond that we have of this guy who would rather kind of be skulking off and doing all this stuff by himself. And I wonder whether Mathis and Felix essentially could have been combined. I think in this book, they're two separate characters, but they don't interact and they don't do much different from each other. So I wonder why there was the need for Fleming to make that two separate characters, because ostensibly you could have combined that and then had a slightly more sleeker narrative. Not that it isn't already. It might have leaned in a bit more towards Bond being a bit more of a lone wolf. I don't know.
I mean, I would argue that I would go back to the political thing and say you couldn't have him too dependent on another national security service because it would be, whereas if he's balancing between the French and the Europeans and the Americans,
Mm,
then you get a sense that of Britain's specialness. we are the bridge between Europe and America.
Mm.
Whereas if he's French, then we're a lesser European power that the French have to help out. And if it's
Mm.
only American, then we're Greece to Americans, Roman Empire, and we're not. We can't. We're no longer the big players anymore.
No, fair. But I mean, does Mathis come back? I don't think we see Mathis again, do we, in the books? So
Ah.
so I think whereas Leiter is a frequent player, and I wonder whether Fleming just decided that they were essentially doing the same thing. I don't know. You might be right.
And also sort of Vesper Lynd's role, as you said earlier. But although Vesper Lynd's role is sort of like, oh, she doesn't seem to be doing anything, but of
Mm,
course she must have got herself assigned to this job, and she must,
mm,
have been much more proactive than she seems in order for her to be fulfilling the role that she's obviously supposed to be fulfilling
yeah.
at the end. Okay, so I think I'm on the last one then. I think this should be number 7. Has that been double? So I really haven't thought this through as well as
I've
I
done
should have.
4, and I went first. I can't remember where we are.
So I've done 3 then. Anyway,
We'll do another one.
I've got
Do
one
another one.
last one, 008 then.
Yeah, do it.
You got another one, which isn't really that big a deal, but I thought it was interesting, this idea that Bond novels are very rich in terms of names. And of course, Bond himself famously is named after a author of a ornithology book in
Yeah.
Jamaica. But then you have Felix Leiter, which is a great name, Le Chiffre, which means the number,
Hmm.
and you have all these names which sort of pop up in various things, and it reminds me, it's a little bit like it reminds me that we should look at Fleming as well as being in the context of espionage and British espionage, but also being in the context of crime novels. And names pop up in Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett,
Mm.
and they're incredibly evocative. And obviously, you can tell that when it comes to naming even relatively small roles, the writer has sharpened their pencil to a dangerous degree.
Yeah.
So it's just one thing that it hasn't gone over the top yet, but it's going to be very important for Fleming going forward, and he's already sort of on his game.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the full name of Mr. Big in Live and Let Die, but it's something crackers, something crazy like, no, I'm not even going to try and remember it, but you've read the book recently, right? You must remember it.
Yeah, I was just hoping you wouldn't ask, because I was thinking, what is it? No, I
Yeah,
remember it's him saying my name is actually, and it going blah 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 and going on
yeah.
for a while.
And then, Scaramanga and I don't know. I mean, Goldfinger is a crazy sounding name, but that Fleming based that on somebody he knew, right?
Yeah, but even someone like Red Gant, and I just think
Rosa
that,
Klebb and Irma Bunt.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's some that they've, and Pussy Galore, obviously.
of course.
You
I
were
must be
avoiding that
dreaming.
one. Yeah, it just strikes me as someone who is he knows how much comes free with a really well chosen name.
And it also leans into what you were saying about all the other characters being far more interesting and humorous and alive than Bond. Not only is he the dullest character in his own story, but he's also got the dullest name.
Yeah, exactly. He's the anonymous one. He's
Mm.
the guy. And by the way, Paul Duncan in the Writers on Film podcast was saying that James Bond was an invention of the Doctor No film, but he does say Bond James Bond in the Casino Royale book.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so podcast war
Oh,
in,
great. Okay.
into podcast war. Brilliant, brilliant.
Okay.
Listen, Neil, that's been absolutely wonderful. Great. What a great discussion. First episode.
Well, thanks very much for having me on.
And so the next one is going to be Live and Let Die.
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
Bam, bam.
We're gonna do we're gonna do the whole song.